Hi, I'm Jamie Noguchi, and this is Draw Jam. It's finally time to color the line art that we've been working on for these past couple times. So, today we're going to go through some flatting techniques and some basic anime style shading techniques that can be used for pretty much anything else. And then I'll probably do some more complicated coloring techniques in a different tutorial, but gotta start somewhere. So this is it. Let's just get on to it. Color time! Alright, before we get started, we need to flatten this image, which basically means using basic colors to separate objects from each other. Technically, this part of the demo can be a click of a button because there's a plugin that you can use to flat your illustration. But I'm trying to do these demos so that you don't have to buy anything. But if you think that you might want to pursue coloring or comic illustration as a profession, it might be a good investment to pick up that plugin. And I'll put a link in the show notes wherever you see this so you can go out and pick it up. But we're going to do this by hand, which is the boring way. But you got to learn somehow. All right, so first things first, we got our inks in a group. I think I have it set up. Yeah, these are the face inks and these are the owl hat. So we're going to set up another group and we're going to call it colors. And we're going to start with a flatting layer, flats. Now you may be asking yourself, why doesn't he just use the bucket tool? Well, I will show you why I don't just use the bucket tool. So I've grabbed the bucket tool, I've turned on all the layers so I don't have to mess up my line art. I'll turn on anti-aliasing just to pretend that this is the way I would do it. And bam, bam, bam. All right, from this distance, it looks like everything is colored in. But as I zoom in, you'll see this wacky halo around all the lines, which is not what you want when you're going for a professional look. And as we zoom in, we can see why. It's because the ink lines are aliased, which means it's not pure black all the way through. The edge of the lines has these pixels that are gray and transparent, and the bucket tool gets kind of confused. Now you can fiddle with the settings so that it gets really, really close to being all the way filled in, but then you have this other problem. And if you turn off the line area, you have these white outlines in your colors. And this becomes a problem when you try to print it out because you'll get that weird halo around every link. The flatting process makes sure that all the colors go right up into the edge and are trapped by the black. So there are a couple settings we need to change for that. Oh, and the other reason why I don't use the bucket tool, well, I'll demonstrate that further. All right, so let's say, let's grab a pen, let's grab basic this, and let's turn down the size because that is way too huge. All right, so a couple settings. We want to make sure every tool that we use when we flat has the anti-aliasing turned off, and this is why. So right now, anti-aliasing, I'm using a regular brush, which by nature has the anti-aliased on. And we got a swatch of color that's red, and let's use a green. All right, let's say I want to change this green to like a blue. So grab the blue, grab our bucket tool, which is G, and hit it. All right, now if I zoom out, it mostly looks like all the green is now blue. But if we zoom in, we can see that there's a little green halo that's still left. Let's say I want to change the blue to something like a yellow. Bam! Now we see that line is like blue, green, and if we do it red. So as we go further and further, this track line is going to get bigger and bigger. So when we flat things, we want to use anti-aliasing. So instead of using a brush tool, I want to use the pencil tool because by default, the pencil tool is aliased, which means everything that you see is either red or not there. And let's get our green again. Okay. Now if we want to turn that section blue, we hit our tool and bam! Now all the green pixels are now blue, right up to the edge. Oh, and there's some weird stuff here. So you want to make sure your bucket tool is also anti-alias turned off. All right, so let's do that again. Bam. Yeah, so now you don't get that weird halo. Okay, so when you're flatting colors, turn off all the aliasing. All the aliasing that you can get. Turn it all off, which is counterintuitive. All right, the inks are back on and sketch layers back on. All right, so like I said, I like to start with the polygon lasso because I like to use as few clicks as possible. Now, if you have characters that don't have a background, which means you're a lazy cartoonist, and you should be ashamed, but I mean, sometimes it happens. So if you have a drawing like this where it's just a bust of a person, you can cheat a little bit. What you can do is grab your wand tool, and this is one of the few cases where it's not going to be perfect in terms of anti-aliasing and aliasing, but sample all layers, so that means everything you see here. You're going to swatch the outside, and then go to selection, expand that selection. I like to expand it by 3 pixels. So bam. And then inverse that selection, and then fill with your flat color. Oops, I have to turn off all layers. And then fill with your flat color. So now everything is colored in, and you can begin the process of separating the rest of it out. But we're not gonna cheat. Let's pretend that this character is in front of a background, and I've done a background. Just pretend that there's background. So now we have to do it by hand. Now you'll notice I'm flatting with a red color. I like to I like to start off with a really bright color, just because it helps me ensure that I've colored everything. And because all my shades have the aliasing off, if I need to change it to something else, I can just do that. All right, so starting off with the polygon tool, to move around, you just hit the space bar, your hand tool comes up, and then you let go, and you're back at your polygon tool. So the polygon lets me use as few clicks as I need to cover the entire thing. And I like to work in full screen mode again. I think this is a hole here. No, I think that's not a hole. I'm gonna not make that a hole. And when I'm doing this by hand, I'm aiming for the middle of the line. So I'm aiming for the middle of all the black stuff, which ensures that when this prints out, the color is trapped underneath the line. Now there's another trick you can use for print that I never quite got the hold of, but using a gray color to further trap the borders of the shades. But we won't go into that because nobody does that anymore. Now you can get a job just flatting pages, but you have to be able to like flat 5 pages a day or something like that, something ridiculous. And the pay isn't great, but if you want to get your foot in the door at a comic book company or work with an illustrator, you can start out as a professional flatter. It's grunt work. It sucks. It's pretty boring, but if your goal is to get in the industry, everyone needs a flatter. Not everybody wants to do what I'm doing right now. Nobody wants to do what I'm doing right now. This is the worst. All right, close that off. All right, now marching ants, which is what I call these lines when the marquee tool is activated, isn't always the best way to check to see if you've gotten everything. So sometimes I use the quick mask tool, which is you hit Q and everything in white is masked, everything pink is not. So this is a good way to just spot check your selections. Looks good to me, so I'm going to fill this area. I use Option Delete, which fills your selection with the foreground color, which is this red that I've chosen. Don't remember what it is on a PC, but it's the flood fill. There we go. This is our selection. We've got the base character separated from the background, and for the background I'm gonna just swatch in a generic gray, basic gray. Bam. Yeah, a little bit darker. Bam. All right. So now that the basic shape is separated from the background, I'm going to lock the position, because you don't want to be working and then all of a sudden move your selection around. And then I'm going to lock the transparency. So when I'm messing around with the rest of this stuff, I don't accidentally draw outside of the line. So first things first, I'm going to separate the face from the owl bits, and I'm going to start with a generic flesh tone. And this is just my general rule of thumb. I like to work with the widest shape, the largest shape possible, and then work towards the foreground. So I'll start with the outline of a body, and then I'll start with the flesh tones to separate those out, and then the costume, and then any big areas that I can separate out, and then go into the finer details like the eyes or the nails or stuff like that. So for here, I started with the outline of the entire character. Now we're going to go into some of the larger areas, like the flesh tones. Kind of a darker color. Okay. You can use the lasso tool as well. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll use the pencil tool and just draw stuff to separate out, but I think these shapes are big enough where I can just use the lasso tool. So all right, now because I've locked the transparency, when I hit this with color, I won't be colored outside the line. So I'm gonna use the Option Delete function again. If I didn't have the transparency locked, this would happen. You don't want that, so make sure that's locked. I think I could use a little bit more red. This could be darker. Okay. All right, now to get to the owl, let's make it a warmish, a coldish tone here. Good gray. Grayish maybe. All right, so in your bucket tool, if you have continuous selected, you're just going to swatch whatever you hit you're only going to get the top part of the owl. If you uncheck continuous, anything that is this red is going to get filled. So both parts are going to get filled that way. So as you're flatting, remember to click on or click off depending on what you need. Sometimes continuous makes it go faster, sometimes it doesn't. So just, you know, keep an eye on that. All right, let's see. Let's further separate these out. I think I'm gonna make the neck piece a slightly different shade. So select this side and select this side. And turn off continuous. Okay, so I like this tannish color. I'm gonna put that into the eye area. But it's tough because there's no outline separating the eye cavities from the rest of the object. So this is when I'm going to use the pencil tool. And then I'm going to swatch this grayish tone just to keep it, so I can hit the X key and swap back and forth. In general, I'll try to figure out where I want this tone to go. Just kind of following the lines here. And swatch. Whoop. So I didn't. Oh, continuous is not. Contiguous is not selected. So there it is. There we go. Now, if we zoom in, we can see that this is a harsh transition from the gray to the brownish tan, the tan to the bluish gray. You zoom out, you won't notice. And this is sort of the distance people will be looking at this. Even when you print it out, they're not going to notice that there's aliasing going on. So don't fret about that. And this is always why you should be working at a print resolution, even if you're not intending to print out your piece, because when you're flatting, you're going to have your aliasing on, and you don't want that to show up in your final piece. People will be like, why is it so jaggedy on the edges? And you'll be like, go home, you don't know what you're talking about. All right, fill that. Let's make the secondary wings that gray color too. So this is a nice separation here, so we're gonna go with that. Then this is a much less clean separation, so what I'm gonna do is select, turn off sample all layers. I'm going to select this gray and paint in by hand the separation line that I want. Bam. Okay. Oh, do I like that transition? Do I like that transition? All right, that's a little bit better. All right, angry eyes. So if contiguous is selected, when you select a color, you're only going to get that one piece that you selected. If you want to select everything of that color, turn contiguous off, and you get every bit selected. So I wanted to select every bit of gray because I wanted to select both of these eyes. If you want to hide the selection, you can hit Command H and that hides it, but it still will prevent you from painting outside the line, so I can't go outside what I've selected. I don't know what it is on a PC, I'm sorry. So let's do that again. Hide. Select, I think you can hide selection in here, or was it view? It's one of these things, but whatever it is on a PC, I'll find out. Sorry, guys. I want a pink around the eyes. or a pinkish tone around the eyes. Because this is supposed to be goopy and gross. Goopy and gross, goopy and gross. That's kind of cool. Okay. Oh, don't forget to save. Always be saving. ABS. Always be saving. And then deselect those eyes so I can see if I missed any parts. I missed that little bit in there. Deselect again. Just a little bit in here. Deselect again. And let's see. Let's go for some yellow on those eyes. Sufficiently creepy. Sufficiently creepy. I like this pink color too, so we're going to use that for the insides of the ears. And for this I'm going to use the regular lasso tool. It's just personal preference which lasso you like to use. For some parts I like to use one lasso, for other parts I like to use the other. It's really just personal preference, as is most of this stuff that I'm demonstrating. And then since there's no color in between here, contiguous doesn't really matter, so bam. Let's see here. Can do some fun stuff with the face. So let's get a slightly darker purple here. All right, maybe a darker purple color up in this brow area. I'll just paint that in. And while I'm at it, let's do something about the beak here. More like not a bright yellow. More like a rotted tooth color. There. Let's grab that pink. Swap that in here. A little bit in there. Do another thing. Clean that up a little bit. Hide that. Maybe get some of that pink in here. That's too pink. Let's get a bluish pink. That's possible. Nope, nope, nope. A little bit more. A little bit more. Yeah. Okay, and then we can grab this paint color and swab it down here. There's another eyeball, so let's hit it with the yellow. Alright, all that's left are the eyes and the lips. So for eyes, the general tendency for most people is to use basic white. I kind of like to use a really bright green. I try to avoid basic black and basic white whenever I color. It's a personal thing, because those two colors rarely show up in nature. But I mean, you can use white if you want. The other problem is that white is oftentimes the color of the gutters, because I'm usually working on comics, so sometimes selections get confused that way. So I try to avoid straight up white whenever I can, but not always. And let's match the pupils with the eyes of the creatures, so this yellow color. And I might change that, but for now, yeah, I might make hers a little bit darker, so more of an orangish. And let's pretend she doesn't paint her nails, so we'll give the nails a little bit of a lighter flesh tone. And let's not get crazy with the lips, so a little more orangey. Alright, there we have everything flatted. I'm going to change the background color just a little bit. Maybe brighten it up a little. Bam! Yeah, there we go. All right, so we're going to do the basic, easiest way to shade this is just cell shading, which uses one tone for a shadow and then maybe a a secondary tone for highlights, things like that. So um, it can also be kind of tricky because if you do it wrong, it just looks off. And there are some tips and tricks you can do to fake stuff. But essentially, we're going to pretend that the light is coming from a top-down direction, or her face, towards her face. So like, let's see. This is the direction. Oh, this is the direction of the light, kinda. So it's just gonna look like your basic generic shading. Now when you're going through this, you want to kind of remember that all objects are either a sphere, a cube, a tube, or a cone. So it's a variation, it's a combination of all those shapes. And cell shading defines the extremes of the edges. So when you're shading an object, you kind of want to, let me see if I can map this out if this makes sense. Sometimes I talk and it doesn't make sense. So the nose shape is really made up of planes like this. These are the planes of the nose. And depending on where the light comes from, so since the light is coming from this direction, you would want to shade in here. And then, these are the planes of the face, so you'd want to shade a little bit in here and a little bit in here, and then the rest of the face goes this way. Same thing with a creature. You've got a plane here, and we'll put this on top so you can see it. You've got a plane here. There's kind of a plane here. There's a dip off in here. So cell shading kind of defines all these planes for you. So it's almost like 3D modeling. Like this entire part here would be in shadow, like here and here, and all this stuff. This would be in shadow. So that's kind of what you want to think about when you're doing your cell shading, but also do what looks right. So there's some cheats that you would want to do, like possibly all of this stuff would be in shadow, but not always. So that's kind of the basic idea. You want to look for planes in your object, and those are the things that you want to define with your cell shading. So that is the theory and philosophy behind it. Let's go into the practical way to do it. So we got our flat layer. I'm going to create 2 new layers. Going to name one multiply, or let's be more generic. We're going to name one shadow, and we're going to name the other one highlight. All right, and we are going to select both of them and turn them into clipping masks. Now what this does is it I'll show you with it without the clipping mask. So right now, if I just select the shadow layer and I start drawing on my shadow layer, if I go outside the lines, that's what happens. As soon as I turn this into a clipping mask, it cuts off anything that isn't happening below it. So this is great if you separate your characters from your backgrounds when you're flattening. Sometimes you flatten an entire page on one layer, so you can't really do this technique. But for demonstration purposes, this is what we're going to do. So turn these both into clipping masks and get rid of that. All right, so my basic shadowing, I like to use a multiply layer, and I like to use a medium purple tone. This tone can be changed whenever you want. So after, but for general layout, I like to use like a medium purple color, and we're going to use our regular brush. So get off the pencil, and I'm going to use my generic round with pressure sensitivity turned on. You don't have to use multiply. You could use some other layer mode like a color burn or something else, but multiply is great for just starting out. So I'm just going to start laying these things in I'm going to start here because the hand is the easiest one. It creates a shadow on the face. And then here's the chin shadow. Get the nose in there. Where there's a deeper pocket, I'm going to put a deeper shadow here. Okay, now, if this was more realistic, there would be a lot more shadow in the face. Like, you'd be some wrinkles and some undercuts and some fine areas like that. So it's really up to you how far you want to take it. For a face like this, where I want to just kind of have simple shapes, I'm going to use less shading than I normally would. Like if there were a lot of wrinkles defined in the line art, then I'd go whole hog with all these different wrinkles and stuff. But since there isn't a whole lot defined by the line art in her facial features, I'm going to be a little more sparse with the facial shading. It's all personal preference, really, how far you want to go. Wrinkles are fun. You get to kind of sculpt them with the shadows. Bring out some of the ones that you want, push back some that you don't necessarily want to highlight. You can go a little bit crazy. Rolls and rolls and rolls, yay! A lot of this is just basically what you go with, what you think looks good. You don't have to be ultra realistic. This is comics, man. Illustration. This type of coloring isn't going for super realism anyway. So maybe if this was a more realistic style, you might get a little bit more into the finer details of how the light lays and all that kind of stuff, and light reflection and things like that. But we're not going to bother with that because this is just a simple demo. Also, I'm terrible at realism, if you hadn't noticed already, so. Okay, we definitely want to emphasize the fact that these are large brow situations here. Push this back as much as I can without going too crazy. You can get really lost in these details, so pick and choose which ones you want to pull out. You don't have to trace every line with a shadow if you don't want to. If you want to, by all means, go for it, but that doesn't always help. Don't be afraid to hide your wonderful composition in shadow. It's the mood that we're trying to establish here. And I'll do another tutorial talking about mood and shadow and all that kind of stuff. For now, I just want to get you guys familiar with the technique and demonstrate the technique so we can play around with it a little bit more. So this is literally just the basics. Nothing fancy. right, zoom out just a little bit to see where you're going. So this is with the shading, this is without the shading. We're getting somewhere here. Okay. Just like the flats, you want to separate objects with the shading stuff. So can use it to bring out the bits you want brought out and sculpt a couple of things. This is getting very dangerous. Very close to pillow shading, which is a big no-no. Alright, so pillow shading, let me explain that. Alright, so let's go with our demo layer. And let's go with a I want to hang on to this shade, so let's go with a generic tube, I guess. Alright, here is, oh, that's no good. Here is a generic tube situation here. Oh, sorry. Alright. We'll give it a brighter top. Alright, generic tube. Pillow shading happens when you put a shadow on both sides of the tube. So you put a shadow here, and you put a shadow here. Tube maybe not the best example of this, but this is what happens when you do pillow shading. This looks funny, this doesn't look quite realistic, it's just kind of a bad decision. So what I like to do is choose one side where the strongest shadow is going to be and color it that way. And if I need to bring out the fact that this is a tube and that it has a higher curve in the center, I will use highlight to bring that out instead of pillow shading, because pillow shading just makes it look silly and funny. Whereas if I use a highlight, it kind of rounds it out a little bit better. So whenever I do cell shading, I try my best to avoid the pillow situation. Alright, back to the shadow. Shadow. I don't know if this is necessarily realistic, but we'll see how it goes. If I don't like it, I can always erase. It's the great thing about coloring digitally. Whee! That highlight probably wouldn't be there in real life, but I'm sticking it in anyway. The anatomy of these things is a little wonky, but I mean, it works. Shade it up, shade it up, shade it up. Okay, maybe this one has a bit of a sharper angle here. All right, these are our basic shadows. We can do funky stuff once we got this part set to give it a little bit more mood. So let's lock that layer. Sometimes what I like to do is use a gradient to kind of give the shadow portion a little bit more personality. So let's turn on our gradient. Let's grab a warm color like an orange, and then let's grab a cooler like a purple, like that. And I'll start from where I want the light to be shining brightly. So I'll start from this direction where the light is. So remember, our light is coming from here. So I'll start from there and swipe all the way to the back. Oops. I forgot to turn on lock. So lock the transparency. So from one angle to X. What's going on? All right. One area to the next. Bam. So this kind of warms up the shadow up towards where the light would be and darkens it over here. And without changing too much, we've got a little bit more personality with our shadow tones there. If I wanted to do it the opposite direction, you get a little bit more drama. It feels like maybe there's some lava or something coming from the bottom there. If we wanted to get really dramatic, I'd pick a really dark shade, like maybe a really dark purple here, and put that in here. So that's a little bit more drama into that shadow without actually having to do too much. Like this is kind of a neutral pose, but with this darker shadow, it feels like there's something more dire that's going to happen. If you want it to look a little bit sickly, use a green. And there's something kind of off-putting about that. So once you have your basic shadows in, you can get really creative and do all sorts of weird things to kind of change the mood of your piece. I haven't even gone into the highlights yet, so that's the power of this shading style. It seems simple when you start out, but you can do all sorts of weird things with it to kind of change the mood of a piece. So for highlights, it's really easy to go kind of crazy with the highlighting. I usually start off with screen and turn this layer down to, let's start off with 80%. Sometimes I go all the way down to 50. And for screen tones, I like to use kind of an orange color. And highlight stuff. Just go in. Things that are supposed to be shiny get highlights. Things that are sharp get highlights. Edges of stuff get highlights. Other things that I like to highlight are goopy bits. So like all this pink fleshy stuff in here is supposed to be very wet looking. So I'll dump in some highlights there. You can go really crazy with this stuff. Comics in the early 90s, when coloring first started to become a digital thing, you'd see covers with all sorts of highlights everywhere. Like, you know, you'd have the nose would be highlighted and the cheeks would be highlighted and the lips and then all this stuff. It was a very shiny era. And if that's the style you're going for, that's cool too. But, you know, sometimes a little goes a long way. Not everything is going to be shiny. Unless you're doing porn comics, then you put highlights on nearly everything. Say that now and start going crazy with the lips. Let's see, I want that purple back again. What's going on here? There's that purple. Forgot to do a little bit in the eyeball here. Don't like that. Get rid of those. Those are a little bit too goopy. Do I want to use a rim light? Oh, Joe. Don't know. Don't know. Maybe I will use a rim light. A rim light is a very strong highlight that further separates a foreground object from the background. And it usually happens in the shadows here. So if I wanted to go here, I'll do a demonstration of a crazy backlight. So let's do create clipping mask, and we'll turn this on to color dodge add. So say I wanted to do a crazy rim light. What I would do is set the layer to color dodge, grab a very bright blue, and use a softer brush here, and then just start painting it in, following it along the edge here. You can go crazy with it. Maybe regular dodge or screen? Nah. Linear color. I like linear dodge. There we go. And just dump it in on everything. Just go ham with the rim light. That's kind of cool, but I think that's a little too much. So we're not going to do that. So turn that crap off. But sometimes what I will do is throw in a backlight in the shadow parts. And I'll usually use a darker blue for that. And so see where this hand is all in shadow, this part of the hand is all in shadow. It kind of bleeds it into here. So what I'll do is I'll use this blue to kind of pop it out and separate it from the background a little bit. That's a little too bright, so I want a darker blue here. And just follow the contours of the most extreme thing that's in shadow. And then turn the layer down. There you go. So we got some subtle things going on here. Maybe put that up in here in the back. It's a pretty subtle effect, but I like it sometimes because it helps rounds out what's going on here. And then sometimes you can set it to different layer types. Color dodge. And just play around with it. I kind of like color dodge. I kind of like the way that looks. And save. Oh, except around the lips. Maybe that doesn't work out so good. So let's go back to screen. And maybe around the lips, that could be a different color. Maybe like, it's a little bit better. Let's go back to dodge. Yeah, that works. All right, so basic cell shading, it's a simple technique, but it gives you a lot of variety in terms of experimentation or establishing mood or just goofing around, trying something out. So once you get the basic stuff down, I highly recommend you going back and just fiddling with the settings, fiddling with the different layer modes, and trying something different, just to see what else you can push. Sometimes you can even make your shadow just a normal color, and let's see, we can turn that into like a dark gray or something like that. And maybe that gives you an interesting effect that you like. So just once you have your basic shadows down and your basic highlights down, play with the layer modes, play with using different shades as your multiplier or your screen tone, and just have a lot of fun with it. This is supposed to get you started on a long journey to discover a workflow that works for you. All right, I think I'm done rambling. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about anything you saw in this tutorial, hit me up in the comments section wherever you find this video. And next time we're gonna probably go over some more complicated and involved coloring techniques. But I wanted to get the basic stuff out of the way first because it'll give us a lot more flexibility in the future tutorials. So, if you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button, and I guess I'll catch you later. Bye.